Introduced myself earlier. I'm Lauren Anderson, KE0HZ, and I'd like to introduce Bryant Clayton, KE0HOU. A little bit of background on how this came about is just prior to Christmas, I got word that our January speaker wasn't available. And it's been rescheduled to March, and it was kind of a short notice of, oh gosh, what are we going to do for the January presentation? It so happened that I had just listened to a podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, and they brought up the fact that somebody or the government, the U.S. government had published a document describing what actually was the policy on electronic warfare, and they were discussing it a little bit. And I got to thinking, gee, this kind of relates to a number of ham radio activities that I'm aware of. And it so happens that I happen to know somebody that knows a good bit more about this particular subject. Bryant and I met several years ago. Bryant was actually an intern as he was getting out of the Army for the company that I'm involved in, and learned he was a ham, and we became friends and done some projects together. And I called him up and said, can you do this? And despite having to go out of town during the holidays, he generously agreed to participate. So we're going to tag team this a little bit tonight, and hope we can provide a little bit of interest in something. I'm not sure all of this is really going to be new to hams that have been experienced, for a while, but let's see how it goes. What is EW? Electronic warfare. I highlighted a couple of items in here, but this comes right out of Wikipedia, is that the purpose of electronic warfare is to deny the opponent the advantage of and ensure friendly, unimpeded access to the EM spectrum. Well, that kind of sounds like what we do when we're working Rare DX, or we're operating on a network in a busy environment, and it's pretty similar to that type of an activity. And then again, publicly available information, the Defense Primer. This is from the Congressional Research Service, in a publication that came out in 2020. And without going in and reading all of these, all of the words, the defensive aspect of EW is access to spectrum to communicate with forces, or in our case, other hams. Now, we're not going to talk about the offensive nature of that very much. Bryant may have a story to relate, but that is not the primary topic. But usually, interfering signals within the amateur radio allocated spectrum aren't intentional. But anybody who's tried to work Rare DX or pileups is certainly, or especially in during periods of poor propagation, it's an issue. Well, what is it that we can actually do about it? Unless in an emergency, the criticality of amateur radio comms isn't comparable to the battlefield. But that said, there are many similarities. So that's a little bit of background here. Last week, Bryant and I put together a fox hunting system on steroids on my office floor, and I'm going to turn it over to Bryant to tell us a little bit about what we're looking at, and getting into a little bit about his experiences here in training other soldiers on EW.
Hey, I appreciate the introduction, Lauren. Just to add. So I know about as much ham radio that you guys know about EW. So at Fort Carson, when I first got here, they needed an NCO that range control could trust, and then also had his ham license. And they said, hey, can you get your ham license? And I said, sure, I will go ahead and study, and I will do that. So please bear with me. And if you have any questions or you need me to slow down or you don't understand something, please stop me. So anyway, this is called the VMAX. It's basically a radio direction finding device, and it supports signals intelligence and also electronic warfare applications. And so right now on the screen, what you see, I mean, this is an Hoc antenna that's been used since World War II. It's one of the best tried and true designs. On the right-hand side, you're going to see the GUI, which is going to show you lines of bearing from which things are coming from. Now, these devices can be networked to where you have 4 or 5 of them, and you can triangulate the positions of these rogue emitters. So, and when I say rogue emitter, it's anybody that should be broadcasting the spectrum that you don't expect or don't want to be there. And just to add to what Lauren said previously, electronic warfare, it's about he who controls the spectrum wins the war. And that's really the name of the game with EW, and with ham radio operation, it's no different. There's plenty of people that hot mic, they hog bandwidth, they do the things that would frustrate ham nets. And all you guys really want to do is ensure the security and integrity of that net. So in that sense, it's really not that different.
So Bryant, that signal that we were looking at is actually the Weather Service broadcast out of Pueblo. So those lines are indicating, but that's where the National Weather Service was located. We were looking at, what was the frequency? 162.474 megahertz.
So if we could move on to the next slide. So really, electronic warfare, you're going to run into a situation to where you don't want to be seen. And so people will operate in 4 to 6 man teams, and they will try to collect people's signals, identify protocols, and really disseminate the information, because the whole idea is to interrupt the link between the transmitter and the receiver. And a lot of times, nobody's going to be attacking base HQ. They're going to be ruining the communications between the soldiers that are out in the battle positions. And so if you can just deny or degrade the signal enough to where you can't get the information through, you've succeeded in your EW mission. Now, the opposite of that is you have these big elements, like, so for example, the Russians, what they do is they jam out massive chunks of bandwidth, and you know exactly where they are. So they're sitting there and they have their huge 1,000-watt transmitters. They have their infantry platoon. They have an artillery unit, because the moment you pop up on the net, you're visible. You can be tracked. You can be seen. So the question really is, what can we do to, that's about my setup here. What can we do to find these signals, identify them, and ultimately locate them? Are they just rogue emissions, or are they people that are just being nefarious a-holes and they just want to run all over your guys' nets? So really, how do we do that? And then also, what's occurring right now, and especially in asymmetric warfare, and again, we're fighting a Cold War all over again, but it's a lot different, and it's done with drones. All sides have drones, and it's very difficult to identify those drones and when they're coming in to triangulate their positions, and that's the real difficulty. And so if you can own the spectrum, you can deny these assets access to your, for lack of a better term, and again, guys, I apologize for my COVID brain. I can't think of simple words like zoo and plywood. So it's this really complicated military term that identifies your asset. So please, anybody throw the word in there. And that's really what conducting EW is. So channel disruption, Lauren, if you could speak a little bit on that.
Well, yeah, we have QRM. We have I would, if anybody's ever listening to the bands on a sweepstakes weekend or some other type of contest, try to imagine finding a place to have a QSO with somebody. It's going to be very, very challenging. And, QRM, QRN, signal conditions can be disrupted. As I had mentioned earlier, it's, a lot of it is just inadvertent, busy bands. So denial of service is always a factor when things are busy, and they're going to get busier with the sunspot cycle going up in HF. That this is the reason why when we're operating on a calling frequency, you don't want to continue to operate a rag chew on 146.52 because that you're disrupting that particular channel. So it's finding an open space. But Brian, can you talk about denial of service from a GPS perspective?
Yeah, so GPS is basically how the world, the Chinese, they have their system. I forget the name of it. You have GLONASS, which is the Russian system, and everybody uses network timing protocol to run their operations, from radios, computers, helicopters, ground assets, air assets. And if you can disrupt their GLONASS, their GPS, their global positioning satellite constellation from receiving that, you've in effect denied their ability to effectively communicate. So going back to that slide where you saw the V-Rod VMAX, even though it's its own standalone unit, it has something called a flywheel. And this flywheel, what it does, it can operate off of network timing protocol for only 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, things start going wonky, and it's not just with the software, it's because it's not receiving the updates it needs. So our military, we use something called CTP, and that's comms timing protocol. And basically it allows us to conduct electronic warfare operations and then also allow communications to get through, because there's these see-through windows with this comms timing protocol. If you can disrupt that, if you can deny GPS, you, in effect, you don't have to jam out the radio, you don't have to jam out the communications or the data link. Just a GPS denial will effectively do that, because a lot of times the flywheel on these equipment is less than 5 minutes. So going on to spoofing, is anybody familiar with what happened with the Iranians? They got us twice, shame me once, and fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, so on and so forth. Basically, they used off-the-shelf software, and in 2011, they took one of our Raven drones and they guided it into Iran, and they landed the thing, reverse engineered it, and then they used it in a parade to throw it in our faces. Another example was, we had a whole bunch of people, like what I did in the military, which was signals intelligence, these SIGINTers, and they were in this boat, and they were in the Strait of Hormuz in international waters, and all the Iranians had to do was spoof their GPS. And of course, with their systems and their network timing protocol, and you're feeding different lat long information coordinates, they slowly guided this boat into Iranian waters, to where these kids, when you think of soldiers today, it's not the soldiers that I was. We're talking very, very soft, very, very intellectual. Some of them are pacifists, and here they're being confronted by the Iranians and taken at gunpoint. So GPS spoofing is real. It's easy to do it. You can do it with commercial off-the-shelf software. If you are familiar with Python, and you don't have to be a programmer, but you can easily accomplish these things. And also, you have, hold on one second, creating interference. Ultimately, like what the Russians do, they don't care if we know where they are. So what they do is they just raise the noise floor with 1,000-watt amplifiers, and nobody can get any communications in or out. And they don't care because they run their own comms via truck or donkey. So really, what it comes to with ham radio and what we're looking at is electronic warfare is broken down into 3 different categories. You have electronic support, ES, you have electronic attack, EA, and you have electronic protection, EP. And so really, what can we do? The offensive part, which we'll go into later, is something that we can do, and the FCC, again, the words escape me, but they're organizations that basically they're hams going out and they're looking for rogue BTSs, rogue cell towers. They're looking for rogue emitters and identifying these and geolocating these things.
They're called official, Brian, they're called official observers.
Appreciate it, thank you. So defensive techniques, hardening techniques. Basically, you go around your ham shack and you identify all of your EMI. Where is it coming from? What is the power? You know, for example, in my neighborhood, I have a neighbor who just blasts the Wi-Fi. I don't know where he got this router, and it is something that is an FCC violation. So what do? I do my due diligence to make sure that I'm located in channels where he cannot affect my Wi-Fi. That in essence is hardening. Using directional antennas. I mean, we're all familiar with Yagis, and you could build more effective antennas than you could ever buy off the shelf. And with Yagis, you can make these laser thin directional antennas that to where they couldn't deny your comms, and they couldn't even know that you were broadcasting, nor could they step on you because you know exactly where you're broadcasting. So, I mean, how many of you are familiar with the program Radio Link Mobile? Applications like that. And with the right antenna, and basically you can have secure comms that you know that aren't going to get walked over by a neighbor or a local ham who isn't too fond of you. Hardening, using techniques to basically build Faraday cages around your equipment, so you're not having this EMI leak out. And then frequency agility. What kind of radio do you have? Do you have what in the Army we call a PACE plan? You have your primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency plan for communications. The way that I like to talk with non-electronic warfare soldiers is there's only so much resources an element can put on certain parts of the bandwidth, the spectrum. And if they're occupying that part of the spectrum, all you have to do, and very much like taking I-40 across the country, you just have to go down the spectrum from the 2 meter band or mil spec, which is 30 to 88, to 2 meter or 70 centimeter or LMR. And nobody has enough assets, especially if they're in our environment, which is, I would say, a permissive or a semi-permissive environment here in the United States, with they're trying to be nefarious and disrupt our communications. They don't have enough assets to cover all of that. And so what's the band plan? What are the communications that we are going to switch to? What are the times that we are going to be comms up? And if we don't make those comms windows, what are we going to switch to next? So being savvy in that way is you don't have to have a whole lot of technological support. You just have to know that the, opponent, for lack of a better term, he only has so many assets that he can direct at whatever it is he's trying to disrupt with your communications. And so all you have to do is travel down that highway, go to the next part of your plan in communications to where it's no longer an issue. And then also, ultimately, we can't encrypt. Overseas, they're all switching to DMR. Here in the States, the only people that can encrypt on DMR are any kind of EMS organizations. But really, we don't have to encrypt if we can obfuscate our footprint. If we can limit our EMI, if we can direct our I apologize, guys. The beam width, we can narrow the beam width from one point to another, then we can effectively deny our opponent's ability to disrupt our communications. So this is a picture that Lauren found online of the VMAX in action, and what they're doing is they're actively broadcasting against a target in Afghanistan. One of the most difficult things is, I've been in both theaters, or all theaters, is you have a different flavor. So the Afghans, it's about their repeaters, and they have so many hills. And so if you can just take down their repeaters, or if you can fuzz it out, you can push them onto a network into where you have more assets on. And I mean, that's basically what these guys are doing. I mean, they're focusing. So again, if you're interested in the V-Rod or VMAX, which is the technology platform that I use, it bumps out about 10 watts, which isn't a whole lot of power. But if you can degrade the signal by at least 40, 50%, then you're in essence denying them communication. So here we have a picture. So we have three different VMAXs in different locations. And what they're doing is they're triangulating the position of a rogue emitter. And so we have plenty of rogue emitters. We call them the stratomist. And so we'll throw this rogue emitter out, and it'll be broadcasting at 1 to 5 watts. And here it's on Fort Carson. And here what they're doing is they're characterizing the signal, and they're trying to figure out exactly where it's at.
So I'll take this one now, Brian. Brian, I'll take this. I'll let you share. You were telling me a story about this, but the characterizing the environment. This is an illustration of a tool, an application that has been developed in the public sector, but is being used by the DoD, where they're identifying emitters, probably ground-based radars that are on a shoreline. And as I noted here, it's really just a highly sophisticated fox hunt. Do you want to relate that story you told me about what's going on in our international waters?
Sure, and again, because this is recording and I'm not speaking in a professional capacity, this is very much unclassified. Everything that I'm speaking about, if you want to look up the V-Rod or VMAX or Stratomist, it's on Wikipedia. You can find the white papers in which it characterizes everything. So speaking to this, Russia and China, when I was in Hawaii teaching 25th ID, they sit there just off the border of international waters, and they actively scoop up our handsets, our cellular communications. And so we know they're doing it. They're in international waters. And this issue is the RF footprint. Okay, so a lot of this is two-dimensional, but an RF footprint is very much three-dimensional. And so it's very hard to locate. Lauren, if you could go back one slide. So this is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional activity actively happening. I think the most difficult part, and you can go forward again, Lauren, is in understanding electronic warfare is it's not kinetic. It's not a bullet that leaves a barrel and hits a target, or something that goes boom. And so because we can't see it, and because it doesn't have a direct effect, it's hard to wrap our minds around. But we can do a lot of things to protect against it. And also just to highlight the difficulty in tracking down signals. I was in Al-Qaim, Iraq, and I was a contractor. And there were these, I don't know if they were just local kids or if they were ISIS, I don't know what they were, but they were having a field day with a DJI Phantom, and they were just swooping down and, scaring the crap out of us. And there wasn't a whole lot we could do. And it got to the point where one of the biggest problems with electronic warfare is if you don't have the permissions you can't go buttons hot. You can't go after the signal. You can't prosecute it. And so because of that, it makes it very difficult, because you're in a situation where you need real-time actionable directions, and yet you have to go up this chain of command to get it. And here, this infantry first sergeant, he is just telling his guys to crank out on 50 cal these parachute rounds to kill this DJI Phantom. And he looks to me and asks, "Hey, can you do anything?" And I said, "No, I cannot. I cannot do anything." And I'm actively watching this guy fighting a war, and I'm explaining to him as a dirty contractor, "I can't do anything. I'm sorry, even though I'm an American and I want to win the war and patriotism and all that fun stuff." And then he said, "If I was to do something, what should I do?" And I said, "I trained your guys, and if they want to push that button, that's up to them." The moment they turned on the several of these sensors in a line, basically a kilometer and a half around the base, and these things called BPs, battle positions, this thing just sat there, and its GPS and its C2 link were denied, and they could no longer control it. And we had to sit there and drive. And again, electronic warfare is not sexy. It doesn't pop. Basically what happened is the moment we denied its GPS, it just floated in the air. And we literally got in a golf cart and we're slowly driving down the perimeter, trying to make sure this thing can't get comms again, hoping that the battery dies. That's how anticlimactic the electronic warfare battle is out there in the Middle East. But ultimately, the thing ran out of batteries, and it crashed, and they were able to recover it. I don't know what they were able to recover, because that was outside my scope. But yes, I mean, that's just one example of electronic warfare. So tools available to hams, and this is amazing. Okay, so again, I said I started with, I got my license because range control on Fort Carson needed a guy that had a ham license and was an NCO, and they needed a call sign, and that's all I know for the most part. That's my experience with ham radio. But with that said, knowing what you guys know, as a ham club, you could characterize signals, you could geolocate them, you could lock them down, and ultimately report these things if they are nefarious to the FCC. And it isn't that difficult to do. And so we have spectral analyzers, we have pan adapters, SDRs. I love SDRs. I've burnt out tons of SDRs because all you need, honestly, is a radio that gives you your level of squelch, or what you call your return signal strength indicator, and a directional antenna or a non-directional antenna. So Yagi is directional, a loop is a non-directional. And just measuring the RISI with 3 or 4 of you guys, you could do exactly what that picture showed, where you saw those lines of bearing crossing, and you could basically say, okay, the thing is in this geographic area. And so when I teach soldiers, it's you cast a wide net, and then you section off areas where you know it isn't, and then you move in and you section off more areas where you know it isn't, and then you move in. Because the thing about RF, these signals are traveling at less than the speed of light. They're bouncing off things depending on where they are on the spectrum. They're going to act in different ways. They're going to have the knife edge diffraction, or if they're HF, and unfortunately with HF, there's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, we tried to track down Joseph Kony. Now we're still trying to do it, and we can't. With HF in the jungle, it's a non-starter. But if they're at least in the 2 meter band, 70 centimeter, if they're in LMR, you can locate these chuckleheads. You can identify them. And I mean, unfortunately, you guys, well, any of you that have been in this long enough know the FCC does not have a lot of assets, does not have a lot of funding. A complaint to the FCC might go completely unanswered. but at least you're creating a paper trail and a record of this. And ultimately, like I said in the beginning, if you own the spectrum, you own the battle space here in the Springs for your ham net, and you'll win. And so,
Brian? Go ahead. Okay, Brian, I was going to say I will take over for a little bit, and then we'll catch up if there's any questions here. But I wanted to run through some of the things. I don't think for anybody that's been doing this for a while, this is going to be particularly new. But just if there's some new hams on here, from the aspect of characterization of the environment, I think that's a really, really key part for successful operating, pretty much on any band. And the tools are remarkable. This is a spectrum analyzer. It's not very big, but what cost $50,000-$60,000 when I was a student quite a few years ago. I saw this on eBay for $68 and covers up through microwave, low microwave frequencies. Pan adapters. I know there's a few Elecraft users in the club, and a little bit more expensive than $68, but these characterize the band. And I've got a better picture here in a second. This is the system that I use. I have an FDDX 3000 Yaesu. I run the RF output from the back panel into an SDR Uno or an SDR Play and run the SDR Uno software. And it's a pan adapter. And I have this on a 27-inch screen. And here's a picture of the entire 40-meter spectrum. We've got CW signals. It's pretty busy. I wasn't just certain what this signal was right here, but at 7.042, I found out that is an Olivia digital mode operating frequency. Here we've got FT8, pretty strong signals. It's pretty busy. There's probably a bunch of conversations going on in there. Here is a lower sideband signal. There's a whole bunch of lower sideband, but here's a case of you might call this jamming, but these are AM signals of international broadcasters that are in the band. And I'll tell you, we have denied frequencies here. If you're having to listen to this, you're not going to hear a signal here, because you can see on the signal strength that this is a very strong signal, but it would be overwhelmed by something here. This is great because now we can even identify what that audio spectrum is, because we can look at the audio passband and introduce all kinds of filtering. And if we want to have a conversation with somebody, well, there's some dark spots here that certainly have spectrum available for that. Unintentional jamming. What are these signals? Well, I'm going to throw in here a teaser for our speaker in February, who is an RFI expert and is going to show us how to track down urban RFI and what we can do about it. But I don't know what these signals are, and this was an actual photo from my unit here recently. Inadvertent jamming. I don't know if any of you are, or those of you familiar with operating FT8. There is a condition called splatter that happens if you end up pushing too much audio through that transmitter. and you go into what's called automatic limiting control, ALC circuits. If you're over driving, you start to get a very, very broad signal. This signal should only be, probably about 100 hertz wide. And we're seeing a very broad signal here, and we're seeing harmonics of it across the band. And those are interfering signals. And that is, you see it regularly if you're on FT8, if you're on FT8 often. For those of you operating, watch your ALC. Do not clip your signal. Here's a clean FT8 spectrum. Again, now, where you may not want to be a inadvertent jammer, where to operate? Well, there's some blue space here, which indicates where signals aren't. You've often heard the adage, listen before you key up, listen before you operate. It's the same thing in digital modes. You don't want to step on people if you can do it. Now, transmitting in a particular location does not mean that you're not going to, because you can't necessarily hear both sides of a conversation. So there may be somebody else, but do what you can to avoid that. One of the other techniques that we have available for communications in a challenging environment is spread spectrum. And this upper picture is a depiction of what's called DSSS. Now I'm having a brain issue. Direct sequence spread spectrum is what it means. In essence, you're broadcasting over a broad frequency range. And if somebody is attempting to jam you, they're typically doing it with a lot of power in a relatively narrow bandwidth. And the fact that this signal here, this narrow band waveform, somebody could easily disrupt that, but it's very difficult to disrupt a wide frequency range because of the amount of power that's required to actually do that. So that's one means that we have available for communications. I think we have, because of the nature of it, and because in essence, if we were broadcasting on a direct sequence spread spectrum signal at a high power, we'd be interfering with a lot of other signals. So I think we're limited only to about 10 watts. I think 10 watts is the limit for a DSSS. And the other means, and what's typically probably better recognized as spread spectrum, is frequency hopping, where you're actually changing frequencies on a short interval of time. And again, it's just very difficult to interfere with that signal because you're all over the place on the spectrum, and you're receiving, the receiver is intelligent to be able to receive that. I think I just explained a little bit about why that worked. Here's what it looks like on the spectrum. Hopping signals are taking place. There's a jamming signal that is being swept across it, but it's not there all the time. It's a moving signal, so it only interferes with that periodically. I wanted to talk real briefly, one last topic here. We're all aware of, maybe not by its name, but we're all aware of the industrial, scientific, and medical bands where we operate. And these include the IoT devices that you have. It's the keyless, it's the key fob to unlock your door. It's tire pressure indicators. It's garage door openers. It's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. And you see the bands. 2.4 gigahertz. This is the Wi-Fi and upper sideband. It is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth frequency range, or one of them. There's another one at the 5 gigahertz range. Hobbyists are buying very, very cheap radios. They're being used for telemetry or for remote control of drones operating in the 902 megahertz space. This is something that's happening that the FCC has totally lost control over. But there is one of the ISM bands is at 433 megahertz. It just happens to be in our 70 centimeter band. And these aren't legal for the US, but you can buy them on Amazon or eBay right now. And in fact, for a job that we were involved with that involved data collection using drones, my business partner bought a radio to put on the drone. And he bought a 433 megahertz ISM radio. And it turned out that we took it to Camp Roberts in California. And thankfully, I caught that before we went and had to replace the radio, because we would have been thrown off the base if we'd been operating a radio in that band. And they checked. But here we are with a market that is allowing these to be implemented. So there is a bunch of that going on. 70 centimeter interference I mentioned. The 33 centimeter band, which is where we ought to be, where a lot of these things are working. They're everywhere. And I don't know about you, but I have been worried about having my garage door hacked. It's being done, and I'm just waiting for the equipment to be able to do that. But there is something that you may want to check out, a software called RTL 433 ISM decoder. It's a generic data receiver that you can use with a dongle, an SDR dongle, and it's actually been programmed to know what the protocols are. And this is a stream of data for it. And notice that you got a timestamp. It's actually the type of vehicle that's transmitting, and it's the tire pressure indicator. This software is capable of decoding hundreds of different devices. So you may be able to monitor local weather if your neighbor has a weather station that is transmitting into their display that happens to be in their house. You could potentially intercept it and get all of that data. I'll include the presentation. We'll put that up on the website, but there's some YouTube videos that show how all of this works. Backing up a second, I mentioned this again, the teaser for next month. Ken Wyatt, who Bob knows quite well. He is the principal consultant of Wyatt Technical Services and the past senior technical editor for Interference Technology magazine. So his topic next month will be urban RFI and ham radio. So I think all of us could do with understanding how to cut RFI in our ham shacks. Just one last thing. Here's another example of that RTL 433 software. Once again, characterizing the environment. This is from a weather station, and here is the rainfall accumulation, current wind speed 2.7 kilometers per hour. This being 433, this is probably a European station. If it were a local one, it'd be on 902, 70 centimeter broadcast. That is the end. Bryant, do you want any final thoughts before we wrap it up, and questions?
Final thoughts. So you guys have a lot of, you have a lot of collective, decent sized brain pans in your ham club, and it's well within your capabilities to control your battle space. And the things that you guys know is enough. If you know how to do radio link budget on paper, if you've done it before, you can estimate where these emitters are coming from. And if you would talk about a fox hunt, you want to have a fun fox hunt, you could do some real world applications, and you could be doing some good in stopping and preventing or just denying these communications from going on. The other thing is, so Lauren and I were talking about this 433 thing. And so I'm building a project right now, which is a remote control rocket launcher. And so right here, those are all 433 transmitters that I ordered from 2 different sources. And what is the name of the Chinese eBay? Alibaba. So I got one of these from Alibaba and the other one from Amazon. So the FCC is not regulating, isn't it? And because it's ISM, I assumed it's fine. And because I can purchase it, who's going to let me buy something illegal? But yet these things are ubiquitous and you can get a hold of them. So, they are everywhere, especially if it's with any kind of short range IoT device. But that's all I've got. If any of you have any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit, and hopefully I can answer them.
Well, thanks for interesting, and thanks for putting up with us on a short notice, putting this all together. So thanks, Bryant. I really appreciate your help on this.
Thank you.
I was not monitoring chat. If there were any questions that came up in there.
No, there were no questions. I was monitoring it, and there's a few things posted in there that might be fun to check out. Jim White posted a YouTube on splatter, so kind of a cool video to check out on that. And then Curtis Hayes also posted a website called thedefensepost.com.
There are some, I see that Raytheon counter drone laser system. I have seen some of those in action, and that is pretty interesting. Those things will drop right out of the sky. You aim them correctly. It's not exactly what we would do as amateurs. We're talking about directed energy beams that are kind of wiping out some of their control systems.
So Curtis mentioned one thing that we have kind of a war story, not a real war story, about tracking down a transmitter recently. I could take a couple minutes to share that. It's a little dangerous doing it from memory, but it's an interesting story.
Please do.
And I've been involved in these a couple of times now. The good news, I guess all the ones I've been involved with have always been friendly. It's like not someone being malicious. It's somebody either having an equipment malfunction or they made a bad choice on what frequency to operate on. And they're causing trouble and they don't realize it. But once you point it out to them, they take care of it right away. So Rex, WD0AJG, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah, so fill in when I forget everything, or straighten everything out when I say things wrong. But this all started with a bunch of the SOTA guys were using 146.58 megahertz FM for some SOTA activity, and we still do that quite a bit. And somebody noticed it seemed to be up towards Denver. They're like, hey, there's a signal on 146.58 that keeps interfering with me when I'm on top of a summit. And I don't remember who first noticed it, but people started noticing it and they started talking about it. And so the first the first question was, well, whereabouts is it? And it was a digital, or it sounded digital. It wasn't an FM signal. So you got all these guys with FM receivers, and the signal shows up. It's a digital signal. And so everybody starts listening, and I'm sitting on Monument Hill, and I can kind of tell if I take a Yagi and point it south, I'm not hearing anything. If I point it north, I can hear it. Okay, that's a pretty good clue. It's probably to the north. So then we started asking people up in Denver to listen, and sure enough, seemed to be very, very focused in Denver. And I asked guys like Jim, NC0JW out in the Black Forest. He could not hear it, if I remember right. So it's pretty clear it was up north. And then we tried to figure out what kind of signal it was, because we couldn't decode it on FM. And the easiest way to do that was we just started getting digital receivers of various formats. And so the ham band is going to be typically D-Star, DMR, or Yaesu Fusion. And we all, between several of us, we all had access to those radios. Turns out it was DMR. So all of a sudden I've got a DMR radio pointed to the transmitter, or pointed with a Yagi towards the transmitter, and I can hear the signal. So now we started listening to them, and it's a lot of transmissions were coming through, and there were a lot of call signs we could hear. And I want to say, help me out, Rex. Was it Spanish language? Was that part of the deal?
Yeah, he was. I think it was linked to Puerto Rican, but yeah, there was a lot of Spanish coming through.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Spanish. So my Spanish is pretty weak, so I could catch every 100th word. But we did start grabbing call signs. And so you start to hear these call signs. Well, the call signs are all over the place. They're like East Coast guys and Florida guys and all this. And but then we get the idea, okay, this is a hotspot. This is somebody's got a DMR hotspot that's transmitting on, in my opinion, a poorly chosen frequency. So we're listening to all that, and we're starting to gather more information. So we got quite a number of call signs, but that isn't the call sign of the transmitter, right? A lot of times, if you can get to the point where you hear the transmitter and its call sign, then you figure out how to contact that person and have a discussion about it. Well, we weren't getting his call sign. We were getting all these other guys' call signs. But it gave us an idea of who the community was. And it was, and so we're hearing people all over the North America, because they're all networked together through some DMR system. And I don't remember, I think we had an idea of the talk group. I think maybe I picked up the talk group, but I don't remember, Rex.
We use Brandmeister to find them.
Well, almost. So we said, okay, this is a Brandmeister talk group. And I think I caught the talk group over the air. But anyway, that's when I pulled Rex in. And Rex is like a DMR hotspot genius. And he starts doing his thing. And he's doing it more from a listen to the network point of view. So now we're not listening to RF. Rex is monitoring various things going over the network, trying to figure out what the call sign of this transmitter is. And do you remember what happened then, Rex? What do you remember what you did?
It's kind of hard to remember. I've slept once or twice since then, but the talk group was pretty well identified, and so I started tracking down the call signs that you guys had listed and tying them into that talk group. And pretty soon it started pointing to one particular type call. And from that, I started doing a search beyond that for a similar call in the Denver area. And I had it tied down to 2 or 3, and it became pretty obvious which one it was.
Yeah, I think at one point you made a guess that it wasn't Brandmeister, but you guessed what network they were on. And then I think you built a little hotspot to actually monitor that network. And that's where you got a lot of this information. And so So eventually Rex came up with the call sign and said, hey, I think it's this guy. And he was in Denver. And I think we found his email address just searching around on the web. Finally tracked him down via that. I sent him an email, explained the situation to him, and he immediately came back and said, oh, you want me to change my frequency? I said, yeah, that'd be great. And I gave him kind of the Colorado band plan information. He chose a different frequency and problem went away. I would have never found it without Rex. That was awesome.
Defensive electronic warfare.
It wasn't some it wasn't some sophisticated method. You found the guy's email.
Yeah. And the thing we found before with like for ham stuff, if you're pretty sure it's a ham that's transmitting, and you do the triangulation thing, you can always get close. You can get to the neighborhood, with a little bit of work, and then it's like, well, which guy is he really, And so if you can catch a call sign, then you just look them up in the FCC database, and that, assuming it's a friendly situation, it's not, malicious, then you just figure out how to contact them and have a conversation.
I want to throw a little comment in here. I'm going to boost for the newsletter next week, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm putting a link in the newsletter next week that is somewhat related, but you'll be totally surprised how many hams you're going to find on that internet link.
One of the things when you talk about controlling the frequencies in the battleground, it is very, very interesting to see what they do at the Super Bowl. You have hundreds of different frequencies involved, wireless microphones, quarterback to sideline communications, the IFB for the television broadcast, the microwave links out of that as backup for the satellite feed for the broadcast. And days before, well, not to mention first responders in the area, all those frequencies. And there's an individual that coordinates those things. And before you can bring a transmitter into the Super Bowl site, they line you up and put it on a spectrum analyzer. They look at the every transmitter has a fingerprint, and they record that fingerprint so that they can, if something should go wrong and they interfere with somebody, they can trace that thing right down. It's an incredible what that individual that coordinates the frequencies for a Super Bowl event has to go through. If you show up with your, handheld radio on your belt, you're not going to be able to take that thing in unless it is approved by the frequency coordinator for that venue. And I had a little bit of experience with that doing NASCAR communications and trying to keep that all separated. When you have the broadcast, you have the 40 race teams out there, you have the officials, you have, like I said, the microwave. So all of, it's like you guys are saying, you got to control the battlefield here.
Hey guys, if any of you are looking for a job, the most frustrating aspect when I go onto any poster installation is dealing with the frequency manager. And this is a job that's given by title, not experience or credentials. And these people are in charge of exactly that. And the moment you start to explain to them what it entails, it's the same. It's always deer in the headlights. So if you're looking for some extra work, I mean, seriously, go down to Fort Carson or Peterson. And I bet you the frequency manager has no clue, because Lauren was telling me a little bit about doing NASCAR. The thought of keeping track of all of those devices, because all those devices are proprietary. All of those devices, they operate a certain way. They weren't built in coordination or conjunction with one another. And to manage that in the power levels, I mean, that's a logistical feat, and it's very impressive for those that can do it.
Come on. All right, fighting to get unmuted over here. So thank you guys. That was a really awesome presentation and a great discussion afterwards. So I think I will go ahead and close this unless anybody has any other comments or questions.